His arms trembled as he held his little girl, paralyzed, fragile, silent, carrying her into another hospital that had already given up hope. And just when he thought no one was watching, a voice cut through the cold air. "Sir, I can make your daughter walk again." He froze, not because of the words, but because they came from a boy in duct-taped sneakers, a beggar sitting on cardboard with nothing but a battered notebook and eyes too old for his age. What happened next would change not only a child's future, but an entire community's faith in what's possible. But before we dive into the full story, let me know, where are you watching from and what time is it? If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and comment on the story you're watching. Your support helps us bring you even more powerful stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. My name is Lucas Sterling, and if you're listening to this, I want you to understand one thing from the start. Money doesn't save you from pain. It only makes it harder to admit when you've lost. That morning in Charleston, South Carolina, the air cut sharp against my face. Winter here never looked like the Christmas cards, no snowflakes dancing from the sky, no cozy frost gathering on rooftops, just a damp, biting cold that made your bones ache. I parked my SUV along the curb in front of the Children's Rehabilitation Center, and for a long moment I didn't move. My hands stayed locked on the steering wheel, my breath fogging up the glass. In the back seat, Clara sat quietly, my little girl, 7 years old, the same age when I was learning to swim in my father's pool, back when I thought childhood was invincible. Clara used to be that way too, unstoppable, fearless, sprinting across the yard, racing the neighbor kids until her curls bounced with sweat. That was before the accident. I glanced back at her, bundled in her puffy pink coat, her hands folded in her lap. She was awake, staring out the window, but not really looking at anything. That hollow stare made me feel like someone had reached into my chest and scooped out everything good. "Ready, kiddo?" I asked softly, forcing a smile. She didn't answer. She never did on these mornings. I hated myself for expecting anything else. I unbuckled her, lifted her carefully into my arms, and felt once again how light she had become. A 7-year-old should feel heavy. They should wriggle and complain, their feet kicking against your thighs. Clara just curled into me, legs limp, her cheek pressing against my shoulder like she'd forgotten what it meant to run. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, I caught my reflection in the hospital's glass doors. A man in his mid-40s, silver at the temples, jaw tight. From the outside, I looked like someone in control, expensive coat, polished shoes, the kind of presence that usually turned heads in boardrooms. But under all that, I was hollowed out. Inside, nurses nodded politely as I carried Clara past them. They always smiled at her, even when she wouldn't look up. I wondered if they pitied me. The Lucas Sterling, the man who built half of downtown Charleston's condos, reduced to carrying his broken daughter through the halls like a penitent. Her therapist, Dr. Stanton, met us in the lobby with her usual sympathetic tilt of the head. "Morning, Mr. Sterling." "Clara," she said, her voice soft. Clara didn't answer. I forced another smile. "Morning." Stanton led us down the hall, and I followed like a man walking toward a verdict he already knew. The session lasted an hour. I sat in the corner, watching the same stretches, the same attempts, the same disappointments. Clara tried, God, she tried, but every time her legs refused, her eyes grew darker. And me, I kept clapping, kept whispering encouragement like an actor stuck in a play with no ending. Inside, though, I was screaming. When it was over, Stanton pulled me aside. Her words were the same as always. "Progress takes time. Miracles don't happen overnight. Manage your expectations." I nodded. I'd heard it all before. Back outside, the cold slapped me again. I shifted Clara in my arms, her head resting against my chest. That's when I saw him, a boy. He sat cross-legged on a flattened cardboard box near the revolving doors, sketching in a weather-beaten notebook. His hoodie was too thin for the weather, the sleeves frayed at the edges. His sneakers, if you could call them that, had one sole taped up with strips of duct tape. He wasn't begging, not holding out a cup, not blocking the way. He just sat there. For a moment, I didn't pay him much attention. Kids like him were fixtures in the city, too many stories, too much tragedy to take in before your morning coffee. But as I passed, he looked up. His eyes were sharp, unblinking, as though he could see through me, and then he spoke. "Sir," he said softly, clear as a bell, "I can make your daughter walk again." I froze mid-step, my grip tightened around Clara. For half a second, I thought I misheard him. Maybe the cold air played tricks with sound. Maybe he'd asked me for change. But then he set his notebook aside and stood, shoulders squared despite the fact that he couldn't have been more than 10 years old. I said, he repeated calm, almost too calm, I can make her walk again. I stared at him, caught between fury and disbelief. Who did this kid think he was? That's not funny, I snapped, my voice low, careful not to let Clara hear the tremor of anger beneath it. The boy didn't flinch, he didn't smile. He just looked at me with those steady eyes that belonged to someone far older. I wasn't joking, he said. Something inside me twisted. Humiliation burned hot in my chest, the kind of humiliation that comes when a stranger touches your deepest wound. I wanted to curse him out, to tell him to stay out of things he couldn't possibly understand. But another part of me, the part I hated most, hesitated, because he said it like he meant it. Not like a salesman, not like a preacher selling miracles, but like someone speaking a plain fact. I turned away and carried Clara to the car, refusing to look back. I buckled her into her seat, my hands shaking more than I wanted to admit. But when I started the engine and checked the mirror, he was still there, standing on that cardboard square, hands at his sides, staring straight at me. And for the rest of that day, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake his voice. I can make your daughter walk again. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. It was going to haunt me until I came back. I should have driven away without another glance. That's what any sane man would have done. Dismissed the words of a 10-year-old boy sitting on cardboard with a notebook too worn to close properly. But sanity is a fragile thing when you're carrying a daughter who hasn't stood on her own legs in months. His name, I would later learn, was Rowan Hale, 10 years old, thin as a fence post. His sneakers were so scuffed the logos had vanished, one toe held together by a patch of silver duct tape that had seen better days. His hoodie sagged off his shoulders, faded red, the cuffs chewed and frayed. Yet it wasn't his clothes that struck me, it was his stare. Most kids that age avoid eye contact with strangers, not Rowan. He looked straight through me like he could see the marrow in my bones. A stubborn, unwavering stare, the kind you'd expect from a man who had fought in wars, not a boy who should have been in school learning multiplication tables. He didn't hold out his hand. He didn't ask for change. He didn't even blink when I scolded him. Instead, he lifted his chin just slightly and said again, I can help her. The way he said it unsettled me. No arrogance, no mocking smile, just steady, calm, almost reverent, and it shook me more than I cared to admit. I tightened my grip on Clara's small frame, turned on my heel, and walked away, but my ears rang with those words, echoing louder with every step. In the car, I buckled her into her seat. She didn't ask questions, didn't mention the boy, just kept staring out the window with her faraway eyes. Kids process things differently. Sometimes I think children understand the weight of hope better than adults. I started the engine, pulled away from the curb. Out of instinct, I checked the rearview mirror. Rowan hadn't moved. He was still standing on that box, his notebook at his feet now, his hands tucked into his sleeves to fight the cold. Watching, I gritted my teeth and focused on the road. As I drove, my thoughts spiraled down the familiar, bitter path. I hated false hope, hated it with a passion most men reserve for enemies. I'd seen enough of it to last a lifetime. The world is full of smooth talkers, men in tailored suits selling miracle investments, preachers with golden cufflinks promising healing if you just believe, even doctors who coat uncertainty with gentle words. I'd written checks to all of them at some point, checks that bought nothing but time wasted and faith shattered. When Clara's accident happened, I learned how quickly vultures circle a wounded family. Phone calls, pamphlets, uninvited visits, every single one of them promising a breakthrough treatment, a new therapy, a chance at something extraordinary. They took my money, drained my energy, and left me staring at the same chair with the same silent little girl. So no, I didn't believe in beggars with duct-taped sneakers and solemn eyes. Not anymore. Still, that voice wouldn't leave me alone. When we reached home, the Sterling estate stood like a fortress against the chill, a sprawling brick house shaded by moss-draped oaks. From the outside, it looked like a picture of Southern success. Inside, though, it felt more like a mausoleum. I carried Clara inside, setting her gently on the couch. "Want me to put on your cartoons?" I asked. She shook her head. I stood there awkwardly for a moment, then excused myself to the kitchen where my neighbor, Margaret Collins, happened to be dropping off a casserole. Margaret lived 2 doors down, widowed, the kind of woman who always showed up with food when she didn't know what else to do. "Morning, Lucas," she said with a gentle smile. "How's Clara?" I swallowed hard. She had therapy this morning. Margaret's smile faltered. She didn't ask for details. Everyone in this neighborhood knew the polite silence of avoiding a wound too deep to poke at. But then, perhaps out of nerves, I told her there was a boy outside the center today, said he could make her walk again. Her brows knitted. A boy, 10 years old maybe, sitting on cardboard, drawing in some notebook, told me dead serious that he could help her. Margaret tilted her head. "And what did you say?" I laughed bitterly. "What do you think I said? Told him it wasn't funny." Her eyes softened, but she didn't smile. Children don't usually joke about things like that. Maybe he's seen something. Kids notice what adults overlook. I wanted to argue, but instead I just shook my head and walked her out with her casserole balanced in my hands like a peace offering. That night, after Clara went to bed, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and stood in my study staring at the shelves lined with law books and contracts, monuments to a man who once believed control was possible. But my mind wouldn't quiet. Again and again I saw his face, the stubborn stare, the duct tape, the way his words lodged in me like a splinter. "I can make your daughter walk again." At midnight, I gave up trying to sleep. I looked out the window at the moonlight slicing across the driveway. For a terrifying second, I half expected to see him standing there, waiting like a ghost that refused to leave. And even though I knew it was absurd, I couldn't shake the suspicion that if I drove back to that hospital in the morning, Rowan Hale would still be sitting in that same spot, waiting for me. There's a difference between a house and a home. People don't tell you that when you're young and ambitious. When you're chasing square footage and polished floors and views of the marsh that stretch out like oil paintings. I thought the Sterling estate would be the crown jewel of my life's work, proof to the world that I had made it. Now it felt more like a museum built to honor everything I had lost. When Clara and I stepped inside that night, the house greeted us with silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the hollow echo of a place that had once been full. No laughter bouncing off the walls, no running feet on the hardwood stairs, just the whisper of air moving through vents and the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I set her gently on the couch in the living room. The chandelier above cast fractured light across her face. She didn't look up. She almost never did anymore. There was a time she used to fill this space with chatter. She'd sit cross-legged on the rug with her dolls, making up elaborate stories about queens and warriors, her little voice commanding every room like she was born to be heard. Now she barely spoke. Weeks could pass with nothing more than a whisper, a nod, or the sound of her wheelchair rolling softly from one room to another. And every day I carried the weight of why. Her mother, Alina, hadn't lasted. She left 6 months after the accident. Guilt chewed her from the inside out until she couldn't stand the sight of me or of Clara. She said she needed air, said she couldn't keep drowning in the constant reminder of what we'd lost. I didn't stop her. Maybe I should have. Maybe that was my first mistake, or maybe it was the first honest thing either of us had done in years. So it was just me now. A single father, though that label sounded too noble for what I really was. Truth was, I was a man with money, trying to buy back a life that no longer existed. And money, let me tell you, becomes a cruel joke in times like these. I could sign checks that made contractors jump, lawyers bow, city officials smile. But when it came to my daughter's legs, every dollar was worthless. I had poured wealth into clinics, therapists, machines, specialists flown in from places with names I could barely pronounce. They all shook my hand with sympathy, gave me polished words like manageable and long-term care, and then walked out richer, leaving me with the same silence. People respected me in Charleston. At the country club, men still slapped my back and asked for advice about deals. Investments, new developments. They saw Lucas Sterling, the man who always landed on his feet. But they didn't see me at 2 a.m, sitting outside Clara's room with my head in my hands, wondering if I was already buried alive in my own success. I poured myself a drink and sat across from her, glass sweating in my palm. She was curled on the couch with a blanket tucked under her chin, staring at nothing in particular. I wanted to say something, anything, but every sentence felt too heavy, too hollow. The silence stretched, pressing down on both of us until it felt unbearable. And then, just when I thought she'd drift off into another wordless night, Clara turned her head. Her voice was so soft I almost didn't catch it. "Daddy, what if that boy was telling the truth?" The words hit me harder than his ever had. I blinked, stunned. "What did you say?" She repeated it, a little louder this time. What if he was telling the truth? I set the glass down slowly. My throat tightened. Out of all the things she could have said, after weeks of silence, that's what she chose. That one fragile question, hanging in the air like a dare. I wanted to dismiss it, laugh it off, protect her from disappointment. "Honey, he's just a boy. He doesn't know what he's talking about." But she didn't drop her gaze. Her eyes, wide and serious, searched mine with something I hadn't seen in months, a flicker of hope. "Still," she whispered, "what if?" I had no answer. Later that night, while Clara slept, I sat on the porch with my old friend Caleb, who'd stopped by unannounced with a bottle of whiskey in his hand. Caleb had known me since college, back before I wore tailored suits and people called me sir. He leaned back in the rocking chair, watching me with that easy honesty only old friends can carry. "You look like hell," he said, opening the bottle of whiskey. "Feel like it too," I muttered. We sat in silence for a while, the sound of cicadas humming through the night air. Finally, I told him about Rowan, the boy at the hospital, his claim, Clara's question. Caleb raised an eyebrow. "And what did you say?" I told her it was nonsense, I admitted. He took a slow sip, then smirked faintly. "You don't sound too sure." "Because it's ridiculous," I snapped. "He's 10 years old. He had duct tape on his shoes, and yet I can't get it out of my head." Caleb shrugged. "Stranger things have happened, brother. Maybe the kid believes something you don't." I sighed and rubbed my face. "Hope is dangerous. It's worse than despair. At least despair is honest." Caleb leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You're scared, Lucas, not of that boy, not even of Clara staying in that chair. You're scared of what happens if you hope again and it breaks you all over." His words cut deep because they were true. I didn't sleep that night. Clara's question replayed in my mind over and over until the sun broke through the curtains. What if? 2 words, fragile as glass, heavy as stone. I knew I couldn't ignore them. The following Saturday came faster than I expected. All week I told myself I wouldn't go back. I had work piled high on my desk, meetings that couldn't wait, contracts needing signatures. But every excuse sounded flimsy when I looked at Clara. She had asked me 3 times that week in her quiet way, "Are we going to see the boy?" She never pressed, never whined, just asked softly, then went back to silence. But each time, I felt that same knot twisting in my gut. So that Saturday morning, instead of heading downtown for brunch with colleagues, I loaded Clara into the SUV and drove toward Waterfront Park. The closer we got, the more foolish I felt. What kind of man drags his daughter out to meet a child with duct-taped sneakers? What kind of father risks her fragile hope on a stranger? Yet my hands didn't turn the wheel. When we pulled up, Rowan was already there. He wasn't sitting on cardboard this time. He had claimed a bench under the shade of an old oak, a folded blanket spread neatly on the grass. Beside him was a small gym bag, worn but carefully zipped. He looked almost prepared, like he knew we'd come. Clara spotted him first. She lifted her head, and for the first time in months, I saw something flicker in her eyes that wasn't despair. Rowan stood as we approached. "Hi," he said, his voice steady, polite, as though he were greeting us at the door of his own home. I narrowed my eyes. "You're serious about this?" "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't," he replied. Something in the way he said it made my jaw clench. Still, I set Clara down gently on the blanket and stayed close, arms crossed tight. Rowan knelt beside his bag and began pulling things out one by one. A pair of rubber bands looped together, a small cloth pouch that smelled faintly of rice when he held it up, a jar of cocoa butter, and a dented bottle of cooking oil. My skepticism flared instantly. "That's it, that's your miracle kit." Rowan didn't look up. "Not miracles, just what I know." I almost laughed, but something in his calmness stopped me. He set the rice pouch aside. "This helps loosen tight muscles. The rubber bands give strength when legs don't remember how. The oil," he glanced at me, "that's so nothing hurts when I stretch her." I opened my mouth to snap back, but Clara's small hand gripped my wrist. "Let him try, Daddy." Her voice caught me off guard. The determination in her tone was more than I'd heard in months. I looked at Rowan. "You've done this before," he nodded once. "My mom taught me. She worked with people who couldn't walk. Soldiers, older folks, people who didn't have money for fancy hospitals. I used to help carry her bag, watch her work. She said the body remembers, even when it forgets for a while." The way he spoke about his mother, it wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't a pitch. It was raw, genuine. Still, I stayed on edge as he turned to Clara. "Can I touch your legs?" He asked gently. She nodded. Rowan placed the warm rice pouch across her thighs. Too hot, he asked. She shook her head. Feels nice. He waited a minute, then began to move her legs carefully, small rotations, not forcing anything, just guiding. His hands were steady, deliberate, almost too practiced for someone his age. I crouched closer, ready to stop him at the first sign of pain. Easy, I warned. I am, he said calmly. Minutes passed. Clara relaxed into the motions, her face softening in a way I hadn't seen in months. Rowan kept speaking to her, not about walking, not about healing, but about small things. What's your favorite color? He asked. Blue, she whispered. Mine's green. My mom said green makes people feel safe. She smiled faintly. Then he tapped gently on her knee with his knuckle. Feel that? Clara blinked. Maybe a little. My breath caught. I leaned forward. What did you say? She looked at me, uncertain. I think I felt something, just a little. I swallowed hard, fighting the surge of emotion. Logic screamed at me. It was coincidence, suggestion, a trick of the mind. Kids want to please, they'll say what you want to hear. But deep down, beneath my hardened skepticism, something I thought was dead stirred. Hope. I stood abruptly, pacing a few feet away, staring out at the water. I told myself not to fall for this. Not to let Clara believe too much. I told myself it was dangerous. Yet when I turned back, she was smiling, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen that. As we packed up, Rowan placed his things back into the bag. 1 hour a week isn't enough, he said quietly. She needs more. I narrowed my eyes. And you're going to be the one to give it to her. He didn't answer with words. He just looked at Clara, who still had that small smile on her lips. That was answer enough. I drove us home in silence. Clara hummed softly in the back seat, her fingers tracing invisible shapes on the blanket. And me. I kept my eyes on the road, but the boy's words and my daughter's faint response replayed in my head like a broken record. Coincidence or not, I knew this wasn't over. If you've never watched your child's body betray her, you don't know what hell feels like. That afternoon at the park, as Rowan guided Clara's legs with those small, steady hands, something shifted. Her muscles twitched, just faintly, but enough to make her draw in a sharp breath. I think I felt that. She whispered. For a split second, I froze. My instincts fought each other. One side screamed that it was nothing, a phantom sensation, a child's imagination. The other side, the father in me, wanted to believe it was the beginning of a miracle. I clenched my jaw, torn between awe and fury. Because how could I, a grown man with resources people envied, sit back and watch a street kid in duct-taped sneakers stir something no professional had managed to awaken? And worse, why was I letting him? I wanted to drag Clara away, tell her it was enough, shield her from disappointment. But then I saw her face. She was smiling. Not the polite little curve she gave therapists to make them feel better, but a real smile, small, fragile, but alive. It hit me harder than anything in years, and I hated myself for realizing how long I'd gone without it. When Rowan finished, he sat back on his heels. His face wasn't triumphant. He didn't look at me for approval. He just nodded at Clara like they shared a secret. That's all for today, he said gently. I cleared my throat, trying to sound in control. How much do I owe you? Rowan blinked, almost confused. Nothing. That stung more than I expected. Nothing. You gave her an hour. You've got bills, don't you? He shook his head. I didn't do it for money. My voice hardened. Everything costs something. He looked straight at me, his stubborn stare unflinching. Not this. I didn't know whether to feel angry or impressed. No one ever refused money from me, not contractors, not politicians, not even preachers. And here was this boy, turning down the one thing I thought he'd want most. It's easy to distrust kindness when you've bought everything else, I muttered under my breath. Rowan didn't react. He just stood, brushing dirt from his jeans. Then crouched to meet Clara's eyes. I'll be here next Sunday. Bring her again. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a suggestion. Was said with the calm certainty of someone who knew the future. That night, I couldn't keep it to myself. Over dinner, Caleb stopped by again, half curious, half worried about the direction my life seemed to be taking. You went back, he said flatly, sipping his wine at the kitchen counter. I did, I admitted, and I hesitated, my pride twisted in my chest. She smiled, Caleb, first time in months. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Because of the boy? Yes. Because of the boy, Caleb whistled low, shaking his head. You don't look happy about it. I snapped, louder than I meant to, because I don't know what's real anymore. The words echoed in the vaulted kitchen. Clara's fork scraped against her plate as she looked at me, startled. I lowered my voice, ashamed. I don't know if it's just in her head. I don't know if I'm setting her up to crash harder later. I don't know if I'm the fool here. Caleb studied me for a long moment. Then he said quietly, maybe being a fool is better than being a man who gave up. I didn't answer. I couldn't. When I tucked Clara in that night, she surprised me again. Daddy, she whispered, eyes half closed. Yes, baby. I like him. I swallowed hard. I know. She smiled faintly. He makes me feel like I'm not broken. Her words gutted me. I kissed her forehead and turned off the light. But long after she drifted off, I sat in the hallway outside her room, staring at the floorboards. Rowan Hale was just a boy with nothing to his name, but somehow in one reckless afternoon, he had cracked the ice I'd wrapped around my daughter's spirit. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was the only one carrying her. The boy's words replayed in my mind as I tried to sleep. I'll be here next Sunday. Bring her again. It sounded less like an invitation and more like a prophecy. And God help me, I knew I'd be there. For the first time since the accident, I saw something new inside my daughter's eyes, movement. Not her legs, not yet. I'm talking about the spark. The tiny light that used to dance there when she'd chase her cousins barefoot across the lawn. That week, after Rowan's session at the park, Clara began trying little things at home. She wiggled her toes, or at least she swore she did. I didn't see much, but she insisted she felt them. Once, when I was helping her into bed, she whispered, "Daddy, I think my heel pressed down." I wanted to believe her. God, I did. But here's the truth most people won't say out loud. Despair is easier than hope. Despair is familiar. It's a steady ache, predictable. Hope, though, hope is cruel. Hope drags you up a mountain only to kick you off the edge when you're not ready. And as I watched Clara, as I caught her stealing little glances at her legs like they might surprise her any second, I was terrified. Terrified that this boy had cracked her open just enough for disappointment to destroy her all over again. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. We were in the living room. Clara had insisted on trying stretches by herself, just like Rowan had shown her. She sat on the couch, blanket folded under her thighs, her tiny hands gripping the cushion as she concentrated. At first, her face lit up. "Daddy, I felt it again," she said. Her voice trembled with excitement. I leaned closer. "Show me, sweetheart." She closed her eyes, furrowed her brow, and tried again. This time, nothing, not even the faintest twitch. Her excitement crumbled. She tried again and again. The harder she pushed, the stiller her legs became. Finally, she burst into tears. "It's not working. I don't want to try anymore." I froze. My instincts told me to comfort her. But something else, something colder, slipped into my thoughts. Maybe this was the moment to stop, before the hurt went deeper. I reached out, rubbing her shoulder. "Clara, honey, it's okay." "No, it's not," she cried, her voice sharp. I don't want to keep trying for nothing. Her words stabbed me straight through. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she wasn't trying for nothing, but I didn't believe it myself, not fully. And for the first time, I considered it. Stopping. Calling the whole thing off. No more Sundays. No more duct-taped miracles. No more risking what was left of her fragile heart. That night, I sat outside on the porch, drink in hand, phone on the table. Caleb called. He always seemed to know when my world was tilting. "You sound tired," he said. "I'm done," I muttered. "With what?" "With this whole experiment. The boy, the park. I can't put her through this anymore." Caleb was quiet for a moment, then he asked, "Can't put her through it, or can't put yourself through it?" I didn't answer, because he was right. By Sunday, I almost didn't drive to the park. Clara sat in the back seat, quiet, not asking, not begging, just waiting. The silence between us was heavier than anything I'd carried before. But when we arrived, Rowan was already there, sitting cross-legged on the blanket, as if he'd been waiting for hours. He stood as I lifted Clara from the SUV. "You came," he said simply. I narrowed my eyes. Not for me, for her. Rowan didn't flinch, that's all that matters. He knelt beside Clara, who looked away, arms crossed, lips trembling. "I don't want to do this," she said firmly. Rowan's voice softened. "Why not?" "Because it doesn't work," she snapped, her face flushing. "I tried all week, nothing happened. I don't want to feel stupid anymore." The boy didn't argue, he didn't rush to convince her. He sat back on his heels and thought for a moment, then leaned closer so his voice reached only her. "Scared doesn't mean stop," he whispered. "It means you're close to something." Clara's eyes widened. She blinked up at him, uncertain. "You think I'm not scared?" he asked. "I get scared all the time, but scared is just your heart telling you something important is about to happen." Her lip trembled. "But what if I fail again?" Rowan smiled faintly. Then you try again after that, until one day you don't. For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the river lapping against the shore, the creak of a swing set in the distance. Then Clara nodded slowly. She let out a shaky breath. Okay, I'll try. I felt something shift in me then, something I couldn't explain. Because as much as I wanted to pull her away, as much as I wanted to protect her from the sharp edges of disappointment, I realized I couldn't. Because for the first time, she wasn't listening to me. She was listening to him, and maybe, just maybe, that was what she needed. Inviting Rowan into my home was not a decision I planned. It just happened. It was a Sunday evening after one of his sessions in the park. Clara was glowing, her cheeks flushed with excitement, her laughter spilling out like music I hadn't heard in months. Rowan had shown her how to roll a tennis ball under her foot, guiding her slowly until she swore she felt pressure beneath her toes. She beamed the whole ride home, and I remember looking in the rearview mirror at her smile. Then glancing at Rowan walking alone down the road with his worn-out backpack slung over his shoulder. It hit me like a punch. That boy had nowhere to go. Where do you sleep at night? I had asked him earlier, trying to keep my tone casual. Rowan shrugged. Around. That answer haunted me. So that evening, when we pulled into the Sterling estate and Rowan hesitated at the curb like he was waiting to be dismissed, I heard myself say the words before I even understood them. You can stay here tonight. Rowan froze. His hand tightened on the strap of his backpack. Here. Yes, I said, firmer than I felt. It's late. No reason for you to be walking around. His eyes darted to Clara, who was watching him eagerly from her wheelchair. She whispered, please say yes. Rowan's lips parted, but no words came out. He just nodded. I set him up in the guest room upstairs. It wasn't much compared to the rest of the house. Just a bed, a dresser, and a small desk by the window. Still, it was more than he'd had in months. He sat on the edge of the mattress like it might vanish beneath him. His backpack stayed by his side, zipped up tight. You can unpack, you know, I told him. Rowan shook his head quickly. I don't need to. This is fine. I stared at that backpack, patched with tape and frayed at the seams, and realized something. He didn't expect this to last. He was ready to leave at any second. That unsettled me more than anything. The next morning, Clara woke up early. I found her in the living room, giggling while Rowan showed her how to stretch a rubber band with her toes. Her laughter carried down the hallway, filling spaces that had sat quiet for too long. I stopped in the doorway, leaning against the frame, just listening. Higher, Clara, Rowan encouraged, grinning. She laughed again, her curls bouncing. I'm trying, try harder. I am, she squealed. I felt something loosen in my chest, a tension I hadn't even realized I'd been holding for months. The house, once heavy with silence, was alive again. That evening, I sat on the porch with Margaret Collins, my neighbor, who had stopped by with her usual casserole. She balanced her dish on her lap, eyeing me carefully. So it's true, she asked. What's true? I muttered, sipping my coffee. That you've got a boy living in your house. I stiffened. Who told you that? We'll talk, Lucas. Charleston isn't as big as it pretends to be. I exhaled slowly. He's helping Clara. Margaret tilted her head. And you're helping him. Her tone wasn't judgmental, but I heard the unspoken questions underneath. Why would a man like me open his home to a child like that? What did I expect to happen? I didn't answer because I didn't know. At dinner that night, Clara leaned across the table and whispered, Daddy, can Rowan stay forever? I cleared my throat, buying time as I cut into my steak. We'll see. Rowan's fork froze midair. He glanced at me, then quickly dropped his gaze back to his plate. That moment struck me harder than I wanted to admit. He wasn't used to permanence. He wasn't used to belonging. And though I'd never say it out loud, something about him reminded me of the son I never had. But the whispers didn't stop. At the club, a colleague leaned across the bar, lowering his voice. So what's this I hear about you housing some street kid? You losing your mind, Sterling? I forced a laugh, brushing it off. But inside, I bristled. They didn't see Clara's smile. They didn't hear her laughter echo through the halls again. They didn't understand. Still, I resisted the thought of calling Rowan family. I told myself he was temporary, just a boy passing through, a helper, nothing more. But as I lay awake at night, hearing faint laughter drifting up from Clara's room, I knew I was lying to myself. Rowan Hale had brought sound back into this house, and sound had a way of seeping into cracks I thought were sealed shut. And yet, a shadow lingered. because for every smile, every laugh, every moment of warmth, there were the whispers outside these walls. Neighbors, colleagues, strangers. Why is the sterling millionaire housing a street boy? The question clawed at me. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I did, and it scared me more than I wanted to admit. Rowan had been staying in my house for 3 weeks before I asked the question that had been gnawing at me since the day we met. We were sitting in the kitchen one evening after dinner. Clara had gone upstairs to read before bed, her laughter still echoing faintly down the hall. Rowan lingered at the table, doodling in that same battered notebook he always carried. I poured myself a glass of bourbon and leaned against the counter, watching him. "Rowan," I said carefully, "where's your family?" His pencil stopped mid-stroke. For a long moment he didn't answer. His shoulders stiffened and he kept his eyes glued to the page. "I had a mom," he finally said, voice low. "She died last year, cancer." The word landed heavy in the room. I set down my glass. "And your dad?" "Never met him," he said simply. Then he looked up at me, those sharp eyes steadier than any 10-year-old's had a right to be. It was just me and her. Silence stretched between us. I didn't press him, but inside something broke open. His story wasn't mine, but the emptiness behind his words was too familiar. He had been left with nothing but memory. I, on the other hand, had everything: money, property, reputation, and yet I was the one drowning behind walls I had built myself. Rowan had no walls left. Maybe that's why he was able to reach Clara when I couldn't. Broken people see brokenness in others, and sometimes that's the only thing that heals. The truth about Rowan couldn't stay quiet forever. Charleston has a way of sniffing out stories, especially when they involve the Sterlings. It started with Margaret Collins again. She showed up at my door one afternoon with another casserole and a look that told me something was wrong. "There was a call," she said, lowering her voice, "from the county office. A social worker's been asking questions about the boy." I felt my stomach tighten. "What questions? Why he's here? Why you've taken him in?" "They said someone reported it." "Reported what?" Margaret hesitated, then sighed. "That you've got a child under your roof who isn't yours, that maybe he should be in state custody." The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. A week later it happened. Her name was Janine Price, a county social worker with sharp glasses and a sharper tone. She showed up unannounced on a Wednesday afternoon, clipboard in hand, standing in the Sterling doorway like a judge ready to hand down a sentence. "Mr. Sterling," she said, flashing a badge, "I'm here to discuss the boy living in your home." I stepped aside stiffly. "Rowan." "Yes, Rowan Hale," she confirmed. "He's not legally in your custody. We've had concerns raised." Rowan appeared at the top of the stairs, his backpack already slung over his shoulder as if he'd been expecting this moment. His face was calm, but his eyes betrayed him, resigned, weary, like he'd been through this before. Janine noticed. "You see, he knows the process. Children in his situation often drift between shelters. It isn't safe for them to be placed without oversight." I crossed my arms. "Safe? You think the streets are safer? You think bouncing him from shelter to shelter will be better than what he has here?" Janine's expression didn't waver. "It's protocol, Mr. Sterling." Behind me, Clara's voice rang out from the living room. "Don't take him." Her words cut through the air like a blade. She wheeled herself forward, her face red with panic. "Please don't take him. He's helping me." Janine's professional composure faltered for just a second, but she recovered quickly. "I understand this is emotional, but no," I interrupted, my voice low and dangerous. "Listen to me. That boy has done more for my daughter in 3 weeks than your protocols have in a year. If you think I'm going to let you drag him out of here because of paperwork, you're mistaken." Her eyebrows rose. "Are you threatening to interfere with county law?" "I'm telling you," I snapped, stepping closer, "that if you try to take him, you'll have to drag him out of here over my body. And then you'll have to explain to the press why you ripped a healer away from a child who was finally smiling again." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Rowan's hand tightened on the strap of his backpack. Clara's breathing was ragged, tears spilling down her cheeks. Finally, Janine sighed, flipping her clipboard shut. "I'll file a report, but I'll also note your cooperation. We'll review this." She turned on her heel and left. The front door slammed behind her, echoing through the halls. When it was quiet again, Rowan slowly walked down the stairs. "You didn't have to do that," he muttered. "Yes, I did," I said firmly. He frowned. "Why?" I looked at Clara, who was still trembling but calmer now, her small hands gripping the wheels of her chair. I thought about the way she laughed when Rowan was around, the way she leaned toward him for comfort, the way my house sounded different because of him. Because you're not just helping her, I said. You're helping me. Rowan's eyes flickered, a storm of emotions he tried to hide, but I saw it. I saw the boy who expected to be abandoned at any second. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't going to let that happen. It happened on a Sunday morning. The ninth one since Rowan had first stopped me outside the hospital. Clara was sitting on the blanket under the oak at Waterfront Park, her curls bouncing as she tried to lift her knee with Rowan's help. I was standing close, arms crossed as always, but this time my tension wasn't about her failing. It was about how far she'd come. She was moving now. Small movements, yes, but real, and someone else saw it. A nurse from the Children's Rehabilitation Center, out walking her dog, froze mid-stride when she spotted Clara. She stood there for a long moment, watching my daughter's legs tremble forward, her mouth open like she wanted to speak, but she didn't. Instead, she stared at Rowan as though trying to understand what exactly she was looking at. By the following weekend, 2 families showed up at the park, waiting awkwardly near the bench before approaching me. "Mr. Sterling," the first woman asked. She had tired eyes, her son leaning heavily on a walker beside her. "We heard about a boy helping your daughter. Is it true?" I hesitated. My instinct was to deny it to protect Rowan, but Clara answered before I could. "Yes," she said proudly. "This is Rowan. He helps me." The boy flushed but gave a small nod. The families looked at him like he was a secret they'd stumbled across, a secret they desperately needed. Rowan didn't hesitate. He knelt right down in the grass, speaking to their kids the same way he spoke to Clara, soft, steady, like they were whole already. The following week there were 5 families, then 11. Word spread like wildfire, whispers passed through hospital hallways, church pews, and neighborhood kitchens. I didn't understand it. How could something so fragile stay hidden for long? It couldn't. The park began to transform. Parents carried lawn chairs, siblings played tag nearby, and a small group of kids lined up to take turns with Rowan. I stood back, watching, my heart torn between pride and fear. Because I'd seen how people chew up and spit out anyone who dares to be different. And Rowan, 10 years old, homeless, fatherless, was a target just waiting to be swallowed by their greed, their questions, their headlines. One evening after the crowd had thinned, I pulled him aside. "This is getting out of hand," I said quietly. "People are talking. Reporters will come next. You don't understand what happens when attention finds you." Rowan's gaze didn't waver. "It's not about me," he said. "Of course it's about you," I snapped. "You're the one they're coming for." He shook his head. "No, it's about them, the kids, the parents. I don't care what happens to me as long as they feel what Clara felt that first time." I stared at him, searching for arrogance, some hidden motive, anything I could use to justify pulling him away from all this. But there was nothing, just a boy with eyes too old for his face, carrying the weight of compassion that came from living with nothing. Margaret stopped by that week with another casserole, shaking her head in disbelief. "Do you realize what's happening?" she asked as she set the dish on my counter. "Too well," I muttered. "You've got families from across the county showing up every Sunday. My sister says her church mentioned it during prayer. They're calling him the boy who helps legs remember." I rubbed my temples. That's exactly what I was afraid. Margaret softened. Or maybe it's exactly what people need. By the 10th Sunday, Waterfront Park no longer felt like the quiet space it once was. Folding chairs lined the grass, and parents huddled together with cups of coffee as children took turns with Rowan. A local diner began dropping off bagels and juice. Someone printed flyers. Clara watched it all from her blanket, smiling wider than I'd seen her in years. She wasn't jealous of sharing Rowan. She was proud to be part of something bigger. And me, I stood back, realizing something I hadn't been willing to admit until then. All the money in the world, all the doctors I'd hired, all the doors I'd forced open with my reputation, none of it gave Clara what this boy gave her. Hope. Rowan Hale, a child with nothing but duct-taped sneakers and a heart full of stubborn faith, had done what I never could. He had turned my daughter's silence into laughter. He had turned my house into a home again. And now, he was turning a city park into a sanctuary. But in the pit of my stomach, fear still gnawed, because the bigger this grew, the more dangerous it became. And I knew it was only a matter of time before the world demanded more from Rowan than a boy should ever be asked to give. Some moments don't announce themselves. They sneak in quietly, disguised as ordinary, and only later do you realize your entire life split in two that day, the before and the after. That Sunday morning felt like any other. The sky was soft gray, the kind that makes colors sharper, the green of the oak leaves, the shimmer of the water. Families gathered at Waterfront Park, carrying blankets, coffee, and kids bundled in sweaters. It had become routine by then, almost ritual. Rowan kneeling in the grass, children lining up with nervous parents, the small crowd forming a circle of fragile hope. But there was nothing ordinary about what was coming. Rowan called Clara to the center of the mat that day. She wheeled forward with my help, her face calm but her hands gripping the sides of her chair tight. "You ready?" Rowan asked. She nodded. "I think so." I crouched beside her, brushing a curl from her forehead. "We can stop if you're scared," I whispered. She looked at me with steady eyes. "I'm not scared, Daddy, not today." I swallowed hard and lifted her gently onto the mat. Rowan unfolded a belt from his bag and handed one end to me. "Hold this under her knees. Don't pull, just support. She's going to do the work." I frowned. "You're sure about this?" He nodded, his expression more serious than I'd ever seen. "She's ready." The crowd hushed as Rowan knelt in front of Clara. He placed his hands lightly on her legs. "Okay, Clara," he said softly. "On 3, you're going to push with your knees. Your dad and I will help steady you, but the movement, that's yours." She took a deep breath, closing her eyes. 1, Rowan counted. I felt sweat bead at the back of my neck. 2, he said, firmer. The world seemed to hold its breath. 3. I lifted under her arms as Rowan steadied her legs. For a heartbeat, her body trembled violently like she was about to collapse. My chest tightened. I nearly stopped. But then she rose, not all the way at first, just inches. Her legs quivered, her arms shook, her lips pressed tight. But then she straightened higher until she was standing, my daughter, standing on her own 2 feet. The crowd gasped. Some clapped a hand over their mouths. Others sobbed openly. Clara opened her eyes slowly. They widened when she realized what had happened. I'm up," she whispered. I couldn't breathe, my throat locked, my eyes burned. "You're up," I choked. "Baby, you're standing." Rowan stepped back, his hands still hovering near her knees, ready to catch her if she fell. "Take a step," he said gently. She shook her head quickly, fear flickering across her face. "I can't." "Yes, you can," Rowan insisted. "Just one toward your dad." Her lip trembled. She glanced at me, tears brimming in her eyes. "Daddy, I'm here," I whispered, arms outstretched. "Come to me." She tightened her fists, steadied her legs, and then shaking, grunting. Straining, she moved 1 foot forward, just 1 step. The crowd erupted, cheers, sobs, applause that thundered through the park. And then she did it again. Another step, then a third, and before I knew it, she fell into my arms, laughing and crying all at once. I held her tight, my body trembling. Tears streamed down my face, unashamed, raw. For the first time since the accident, I didn't feel like I was carrying her brokenness. I was standing with her. I realized, in that moment, that it wasn't just Clara who stood that day. It was me. For years I had collapsed under guilt, under failure, under walls I'd built to keep the world out. And here, in front of strangers, my little girl had lifted me back to my feet. Hope, dangerous, terrifying hope, was alive in me again. Rowan stood quietly nearby, his hands shoved into the pocket of his hoodie. He didn't smile, didn't bask in the attention. He just watched Clara, eyes steady. Like he knew this was always going to happen. The crowd swarmed closer. Parents cried, kids clapped, a pastor raised his hands like he was witnessing a miracle. One woman sobbed into her husband's shoulder. She walked, she kept repeating. She walked, and in that cinematic chaos, I caught Rowan's gaze. He gave the smallest nod, almost like he was telling me, "See, it was never about me, it was about her." That night, long after the cheers had faded, I stood in the kitchen, staring at my daughter asleep on the couch, legs curled under a blanket, a faint smile still on her lips. And I thought of Rowan's words, the ones he'd repeated again and again, "The body remembers." I poured myself a drink, sat down heavily, and whispered into the quiet house, "So does the soul. News spreads faster than fire, and once it catches, there's no controlling the burn." The day Clara stood, people clapped and cried like they'd seen a resurrection. By the next morning, it was no longer a secret. A nurse had recorded a short clip on her phone, just 15 seconds of Clara trembling into my arms, and she posted it online. By noon, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Texts, emails, calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Words like miracle and medical breakthrough screamed from headlines. Reporters wanted interviews. Nonprofits wanted partnerships. Doctors wanted to collaborate. And in the middle of it all was Rowan, a boy who still wore duct-taped sneakers, sitting cross-legged on my living room floor, sketching in his notebook like none of it mattered. But it did matter. That week, a non-profit representative showed up at my office. He was slick, dressed in a navy suit, smiling too wide. "Mr. Sterling," he said, shaking my hand firmly, "we'd like to feature your daughter's story in our campaign." And the boy, of course. We could raise thousands, maybe millions for families in need. Imagine the good it could do. I narrowed my eyes. For the families or for your organization? He chuckled a little too smoothly. Both, ideally, everyone wins. I escorted him out before he could finish his pitch. That night I found Rowan on the back porch, staring at the marsh. He didn't turn when I slid the door open. "They're not going to stop," he muttered. "They'll keep coming." I sat beside him. "We can control this." "No, we can't." His voice was sharp, older than his years. "I've seen what happens when people get desperate. They'll pull and pull until there's nothing left. I'm not going to be a circus act." His words hit me hard. He was 10, and already he knew the danger of being consumed by other people's hunger. The next morning, a doctor called from New York. He spoke with authority, throwing out terms and credentials. "We'd like to study the boy," he said over the phone. "See if he has a unique gift, neurological intuition perhaps. We'll provide lodging, education, full guardianship. He'd be taken care of. Like a lab rat," I asked flatly. The doctor cleared his throat. "Like a pioneer." I hung up before I said something worse. Rowan grew quieter as the week went on. He kept his backpack packed, always near him. At dinner one night, he pushed his plate away and said softly, "Maybe I should go." Clara froze. Her fork midair. "Go where?" He shrugged. "Away, before this gets bigger than me." "No," Clara shouted, louder than I'd heard her in months. Tears welled in her eyes. "You can't, you're helping me." Rowan looked down, jaw tight. "That's the problem. Everyone thinks I'm something I'm not." I felt a storm rise in my chest. I slammed my palm on the table, startling both of them. "You think walking away makes you less of a target. You think disappearing fixes this." Rowan's eyes flashed. "I don't want to be a miracle, Mr. Sterling. I just want to be a kid." The silence that followed was unbearable. Clara sobbed into her hands. Rowan grabbed his backpack and stood like he was ready to walk out that second. That's when I said it. "You're not just a miracle, Rowan." I told him, my voice raw. "You're proof." He froze. "Proof that broken people can carry the cure. Proof that the world doesn't need another rich man in a suit. It needs someone who knows what it feels like to hurt and still chooses to heal." Rowan's shoulders tensed. He didn't turn right away. When he finally did, his eyes were wet but steady. "Why are you fighting for me?" he asked. "Because," I said, "you've already saved my daughter, and you've saved me. I won't let the world take that away." The following Sunday, families gathered again at the park. More than before, twice as many. I saw cameras, I saw microphones. The circus Rowan feared had already begun, but as he knelt beside Clara and guided her through her stretches, his voice was calm, steady, unshaken. "It's not about me," he told her, and I realized he wasn't just talking to her. He was talking to all of us. "It's about them." And when I looked around at the children smiling for the first time in months, at the parents clinging to hope like oxygen, I understood. Rowan Hale was right, but I also knew this miracle had a cost, and it was only beginning to show its teeth. Months have passed, seasons shifted, and so did we. If you walked into the Sterling estate today, you wouldn't find silence hanging in the air like it used to. You'd hear footsteps, real ones, padding across the hardwood floors. Not perfect steps, not without effort, but steps nonetheless. Clara's laughter trails behind them, bright, uncontainable, echoing off the walls that once held nothing but grief. She can walk short distances now, 10 steps across the living room, 15 on a good day. She still wobbles, sometimes tumbles, but she always gets back up, determined. And every time she does, she looks at Rowan like he's the reason her legs remember. And maybe he is. Rowan still lives with us. He's got his own room now, though his backpack still sits by the desk, packed, ready, like he hasn't convinced himself this is permanent. But he's not just a boy on the move anymore. He goes to school part-time, blending algebra and English with afternoons at the park where families still gather. Sundays have turned into a ritual. Rowan, kneeling in the grass, guiding kids who arrive broken but leave a little less so. I watch him sometimes from the sidelines, surrounded by parents whispering gratitude. He's not the boy on the cardboard anymore. He's something else now, still quiet, still stubborn, but carrying himself with a kind of strength most men never learn to find. One evening, I found myself sitting on the porch while Rowan and Clara played cards at the kitchen table. Their laughter spilled through the open window, the kind of laughter that heals the ache in your chest without asking permission. Caleb stopped by, leaning against the railing with a smirk. "You've changed, Lucas," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "You used to measure life in dollars and contracts," he said. "Now you measure it in laughs." I chuckled softly, sipping my drink. "I didn't change, Caleb. I was changed. Here's the truth I never saw coming. It was never just about healing Clara's legs. It was about healing a home, a family, a community that had forgotten what it felt like to hope. And if I'm honest, it was about healing me too, the man who thought control could keep sorrow at bay, the man who thought money could buy peace. It couldn't, but a boy with duct-taped sneakers did. Rowan doesn't like to be called a miracle worker. He shakes his head whenever someone says it. "I'm not special," he insists. "I just remember what my mom taught me. The body remembers, people remember, but I know better." Sometimes the saviors we pray for don't wear white coats. Sometimes they come in duct-taped sneakers, carrying nothing but stubborn faith and a reason to keep showing up. And that's why, even now, I can still feel the chill of that morning months ago, the moment a boy looked at me outside a hospital and said words that froze me in my tracks. "Sir, I can make your daughter walk again." And against every instinct I had, against every wall I built, he was right. When I look back on everything, I realize this story was never just about my daughter walking again. It was about what happens when brokenness meets stubborn faith. A child with nothing gave us everything, a reason to believe again, and maybe that's the lesson we can all carry. Healing doesn't always come dressed the way we expect. Sometimes it's not a doctor in a white coat or a solution money can buy. Sometimes it's a voice from the margins, someone overlooked, showing us that hope is alive in the most unlikely places. So I'll ask you, what duct-taped miracles are you ignoring in your own life? Who have you underestimated when in reality they might hold the very thing your soul needs? Because sometimes the people we're tempted to dismiss are the very ones who carry the cure. If this story makes you think, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your reflections. If you see it differently, share your opinion in the comments. We learn more when we listen to each other. And if stories like this speak to you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next one.